Paint My Valor, Paint My Loss. Volume 1, Varnish Over Blood. Salt Flats, The Find. I found him in the winter salt flats, where wind drags itself across the ground like a flayed thing, and the sky is an overturned bowl, cold porcelain veined with hairline cracks of cloud. The plane was stitched into crisp hexes of salt, each cell lipped like a coin, and rimmed with hoarfrost so fine it looked sugared. Step wrong, and the crust whispered and popped, exhaling a breath that tasted of pennies and aspirin. Shallow brine pans lay like saucers under glass, a skin of ice crazing by noon and knitting again by dusk, so true and level that light pretended to be water and was believed. Far-off mountains were only smudges, charcoal teeth bitten into the rim of the world, and nearer, the only plants were dead salt bush, black knots scabbed to the earth. The wind salted our lips and made the eyes ache. Even the silence crackled, a thin static strung between ground and sky. Tracks of something, fox cart, or rumor, went brittle as soon as they were made and kept going toward a mirage that sat low as a cat, refusing to move. Anatomy of the flats. Under the salt there was another country, plates of halite rafted and overlapped where last spring's water had gone lame and limped away, leaving pressure ridges, the locals called them teepees, tilted like broken tents. In the blue mornings, mirabilite bloomed out of the flats in brittle cauliflower crowns and wept into clear puddles by noon. Gypsum grew there, too, satin-sparred needles that caught the light like a shy idea. The mountains that ringed us threw down alluvial fans, pale aprons spread with stones, varnished brown-black by a slow chemistry of wind, dew, and time. Even the mud was articulate, speaking in hex and star cracks that remembered every drought. Small lives at the brine edge. For a place that looked dead, it whispered. At the edges where brine went soft, and the world forgave itself a little, alkali flies made living skirts on the water. When sun struck right, you could see brine shrimp ticking in the pans, transparent commas blinking through the green, their tiny battles staining the shallows the barest rosé. Avocets and phalaropes came needled the surface, legs writing cursive across the mirror. Farther out on the drier flats, a pair of snowy plovers ghosted along, the only snow we were owed. Now and then a kit fox printed the crust with careful hieroglyphs and vanished into glare. Ravens drew black stitches between sky and ground and laughed like gossiping grandmothers. Mirages and weather customs. Weather had its own customs here. Dust devils spooled up out of nothing and went looking for pronouns. Virga fell in silvery veils and never touched us. Some afternoons the sun wore bright mock suns at its shoulders. Parhelia braided into the cold. On the sharpest days, a superior mirage lifted the charcoal teeth of the mountains and set them floating like ships. Once a caravan on the far road stacked into a castle, then unstacked into a string of mules again, when the air changed its mind. The wind carried iodine and egg and a nick of copper. It pared sound down to bone. When it dropped, frost wrote its small alphabets across the salt, and the flats rang faintly under our boots, the note of a plate set spinning. First, look at the swordsman. He was easy to spot, a man-shaped noise in the silence, a smear of iron hues and laughter. His sword was longer than good sense and looked as if someone had tried to harvest thunder with it, long, one-handed, and chewed at the edges with chips, curls, and nicks, a metallic coastline bitten by tides of war. I sketched him practicing with it that first afternoon, awkward on purpose, compensations stitched into his form. He choked high on the grip, sometimes even pinching the ricasso in a gloved hand to shorten the lever. He let the pommel swing like a counterweight and slid his backhand an inch to tune the arc. The cuts arrived late, but heavy, and when he recovered, he did it in 2 beats, ugly little half-steps that kept the blade from dragging him down. "Too long," he said, grinning, "so I borrow length from the world." Nothing about it was clean. Nothing about him was either. Names he wore. He called himself Meagre John. He called everything else worse. Long Hunger, Dust Groom, John of the Ledger, Ricasso Jack, the Laughing Butcher. He hated that one. Crow Teeth, Sir Arithmetic, the Bridegroom of Storms, the Tallyman, Black Hair, and the one that made him break a tankard, Forever John. If pressed, he'd say, "Pick one and bury it. Names breed in the dark." A name tested in a tavern. That night in a lantern-lit beer room, a drover tried Laughing Butcher across the table to see what it bought him. John smiled without teeth, set his tankard down, then set it down again a little harder so it became pieces. "No," he said, very pleasant. "That one is rented to ghosts." An old woman sweeping a stoop called him Dust Groom, and he bowed as if to a mother. On the road, a gray priest blessed him as Sir Arithmetic. John's fingers tapped a silent abacus along his thigh, and he answered with a proof. "2 wrong names don't sum a right man." A child whispered Black Hair, and he knelt so she could plait a blue bead into the tie at his nape. He wore the bead until it broke. The painter and the subject. "Paint me handsome," he said the first time, not looking at me. "The trick to living forever is to eat the heart of someone prettier than you, or wiser, or heavier. It changes every morning. They tell me different rules." "Who tells you?" I asked. Winter made a chisel out of my breath. He shook his head, as if to dislodge a memory. "They don't like to be painted." He grinned, and I knew then my work would be faithful, because the grin was not the grin of a cruel man or a noble one. It was an underfed grin, a stray dog's grin, as though he had found a joke somewhere in a ditch and had been licking it for days. He wore mismatched plates and boiled leather scavenged into a harmony by the same hands that had battered his blade. His hair hung long and black, straight as wet ink, tied low with a strip of leather when the wind got ideas. His eyes were almost delicate with the confused holiness of a baby bird. He was tall and slender, built on string and wire. Small, well-defined muscles moving under the skin like careful handwriting. He stood as if waiting to be struck, but also as if he had already been struck and was deciding if it had been a compliment. I set my tripod and leaned canvas on it. The bristles drank turpentine. Pigments bloomed, oil eating light. I've always tried to paint truth, but truth performs better for a crowd, and Meagre John lured them. The wager in Salmar. He ate hearts. He said so in the public square of Salmar, where he stood atop a fallen milestone and declared in his sing-song, "I wage against your heart. Brave friends, not your purse. If you win, you take my sword. If I win, I take the little drum in your chest." Half the crowd laughed. 5 stepped forward. One stayed when he saw John's eyes, how they went far away and then snapped back, how he nodded at no visible man and whispered, "Yes, I hear you. I am listening, I promise." Then said aloud to the opponent, "Have we met? You look like a Tuesday." He tilted his head, listening. "Wednesday. They say you look like a Wednesday." A dust devil shouldered up out of the square just then, a child-sized column of grit that stole hat ribbons and confettied the air with chaff and ticket stubs from no known show. It wove between John and the crowd like an impatient referee, lifting skirts and tempers, purling a thin music from loose shingles. John watched it pass with private recognition, as if an old coach had clapped him on the back and promised him a bad play that would somehow work. "Name's Farron," said the challenger, a siege soldier with resin-stiff beard and armor like scales of dark bread. "Oh, good," John said. "They like Farron. You smell like rain eating dust. You married?" "No." "Shame." John tapped his chest. "I'm married to a lot of people. Most of them don't know. Keeps me busy." Duel with Farron. There are duels that are mathematical, and duels that are poetry, and there are duels that are one-sided bloodbaths. This was an allegory in bronze and meat, given the courtesy of music. John's blade rang off Farron's pauldron, and the sparks tangled with a fine red mist, fireflies and rose seeds fleeing a wedding. He moved with a brutal grace, as though the ground hated him, and he hated it back, each step a negotiated treaty that looked like dance. His height and reach kept finding sly advantages, long arms turning small angles into wide solutions, while the narrow cables of his forearms wrote quick corrections in the air. Tendons stood in his neck when he feinted. His shoulders were hinge and pulley, not bulk, and the sword rode those levers rather than being lifted by them. Farron was disciplined, efficient. Lightning wants a path. It found John's jagged sword, sang through it, and went out again, leaving the edges wet and bright. Every time Farron struck, John laughed. It wasn't bravado, it was a misfiring mechanism. He laughed when he shouldered a blow along the ridge of his shield and let it skate away in a red arc. He laughed when his bad knee buckled and popped like a peach pit, heel skidding on blood he had not meant to spill. He laughed when he went quiet and did something fast and complicated with his wrist. The chipped edge of his sword slipped under the lower rim of Farron's breastplate and peeled it back like the lid of a sardine tin. And a neat seam opened, warm as a mouth, writing a thin cursive of crimson down the cuirass.
Arithmetic over mercy.
When Farron knelt, his hands pressed to the geometry of his wound, the crowd's laughter turned into breathing. John exhaled, then spoke to someone I could not see. Yes, I know. I did the thing you said. You are very bossy. Fine, then. We will do it your way." He looked at Farron. "Do you believe I will live forever?" Farron blinked sweat and rain. "No man does." "Good," John said cheerfully. "I like being confused." He cut the heart out. He did it cleanly, like a butcher, like a priest. There was blood, because hearts are very committed to their work, but not a gory storm. John cupped the meat with his hands, as if he had caught a bird. I painted the heart with a pink that eats the eye. Alizarin and cadmium teased with a brush hair thinned to a single whisper, and John's face with a glaze of brown madder to show how light sank into his stubble and glowed back. He ate with care. He chewed. He closed his eyes. A steamy breath rose from his mouth, and for a moment he looked astonished, as people do when they hear their name called in a crowd. "Farron," he murmured, mouth red. "You liked storms. I like storms." He swallowed. "We are married now, for a while." The crowd calculates. A woman screamed. A child laughed. The crowd became a solvent the scene dissolved into. In it floated 100 brief thoughts. The fishmonger tallying odds like scales. The priest subtracting sin from necessity and getting a remainder. The baker wondering if blood warms dough. The thief timing the gasp. The widow naming mercy. The soldier reciting tendons. The mother saying, "Don't look," and looking. The boy deciding forever is a bite. The scribe drafting a law in his head, the peddler promising to tell it true and already gilding it, the lovers realizing this was a bad place to break, the God-fearing woman bargaining with a god who does not. The old man muttering duels used to be slower, the girl thinking the sparks were prettier than midsummer, the man touching his chest to be sure the drum was still there. All of it swirled, precipitate and scum, and the square kept boiling. Art and aftermath. I sold the painting of that duel to a collector who preferred pictures where the violence is far away enough to be moral and close enough to be exciting. The poem of it broke into coins and clattered. Provenances and fates. I kept a ledger once, neat columns for coin and gilt. It soured, so I turned the entries into stories. Selma read, Farron's heart, a 3/4 canvas, the spray stippling the lower right like freckles. Bought by a spice factor in Salmar, who hung it opposite his prayer alcove so the two could argue. The house burned in a bread oven fire, the alcove charred, the painting did not. He swore off leavening and took to ship's biscuit. Years later, his granddaughter traded the piece for a dowry, and then refused the marriage. The groom said the picture had been eating their luck. She said it had been eating her fear. Knife-eye at Darren, a thin painting, all steel and river light. A ferryman nailed it in his boathouse and charged a copper for a look. In flood season, the river rose and the painting floated off the wall like a saint that remembered how to swim. It washed up in a reed bed and lived a summer with herons. A tinker found it and framed the warped edge in driftwood and sold it to a woman who had never seen the Darren and never would. She hung it over a dry well and said the room sounded wetter. The chalk theorem, John and the measure maker, fenced inside a ring of numbers, purchased by a schoolmaster who believed children behave better under geometry. They did not. He painted over the blood with equations. When he died, the town scraped the plaster and found my reds arguing with his chalk. They cut the wall free and installed it in the courthouse, where verdicts since have been quick and often correct, but rarely kind. Stormscar ascendant, Iril mid-lunge, her pike long as blame, John laughing wrong. A bandit lord took it as tithe and set it behind his chair so supplicants would see what happened to pride. One winter, a hungry cousin pulled the canvas off its stretcher to wrap a newborn. The child lived. The bandit did not see spring. The cousin sold the empty frame for a mirror and kept the canvas as a blanket. Someone someday will find a pike head stitched with blue thread in a cradle quilt and not know why the baby dreams of thunder. Twins with a spear, Orin and Ort sharing the breath between them, John cutting the beat in half. Bought by a brewer for the taproom, brawls improved, fewer plates, better footwork. When taxes bit, he rolled the canvas and hid it in a cask. The barrel was tapped at midsummer, and the beer came red for 3 hours. Pilgrims drank it and were brave until morning. The brewer swore never to hide art in thirst again. Cinnabar none counting, rosary like falling nails, lips moving through litany footwork, given, not sold, to a prior who fed me when the snows were theater quiet. He hung it in the infirmary, and the sick counted along with her beads. When soldiers came to take the monastery's silver, they took the painting instead, thinking it rich with luck. Their captain was later seen bargaining with a roadside shrine, trying to trade back a conscience that would not stop tallying. Glass hand refractions, Tavi's fused bottles making a cathedral of light on his knuckles, acquired by a glazier's guild hall. On the day their great window shattered in heat, the painting collected a fan of fine cracks that made Tavi's hand look finally honest. An apprentice traced the breaks in lead and invented a pattern that now lives in half the city's churches. A saint's hand made of bottle glass, blessing a street that refuses to be sober. The boy on the fence. You cannot buy that one. It was never for sale. Still, copies escaped me. A magistrate commissioned a small version to hang behind his chair as a warning to fathers who play at legend. He ruled well until the day he noticed that in the copy the boy had turned his head to look directly at him. He resigned before supper and went home to teach his children how to mend nets. Ricasso Jack in blue. John choking up on the blade, cuff misbuttoned, sky the color of drowned coins. A courtesan bought it for her antechamber and said it kept rude men gentle. They felt watched by someone who had already forgiven them. When she died, her girls burned her ledgers and kept the painting. They hang it now in a stairwell, where the light is always kind. Valor in a barn. The circle chalked, rafters listening. A farmer paid me in grain and hung it above his family table. His eldest went to war and came back quieter. He stared at the circle for a winter and then plowed in curves the next spring, following the chalk in the earth. Yields rose. He married a miller's daughter, who said she did not mind living in a field that believed in geometry. The long tooth, the sword alone, notch-backed, haloed in borrowed light. A collector of relics bought it to complete a room of saints' fingers and kings' helmets. He fell asleep beneath it and dreamt of a river he had never crossed. In the morning he sold the whole room and used the money to build a bridge over nothing in particular, just a good span from shade to sun, where tired people sit and think about crossing. I tell myself the paintings go on doing the small work I cannot, teaching rooms to breathe, training hands to count, making brave people careful, and careful people kind. Some are lost, none are quiet. On the road with the chorus. For a while, John said, days later, when it was just us. We were on the road, such as it was, a filament of mud and ancient cobbles stitched across the belly of the plain. That's the worst and best part. They never shut up. The hearts? He touched his chest, surprised to find it there. Everyone. The dead, the wolves, the god with no sleeves. I have a squad in here. He knocked his sternum like it was a door. He whispered to his shoulder, "No, I'm not telling him about the knives. He paints. He's on a different payroll." To me, louder. They keep me clever, or they keep me too busy to be stupid. I don't know. Why hearts? Why eat hearts, then? He wrinkled his brow as if puzzling. Because I am empty, and because the dirt loves us so much and so heavy that it keeps trying to pull us down, and because they told me there is always a rule. Today, the rule is hearts. And tomorrow, I said. Already I was sketching him in charcoal, his profile like a ragged cliff, his hair a spill of ink roped at the nape, the long line of his longsword slung over his shoulder, a back-of-the-hall spear younger and handsomer men would envy. Tomorrow the rule will be bread, probably. He stared at the horizon, or thumbs. They whisper it to me. They change their minds. I've asked for a written list. They say paper is for cowards. Simple as a knife. He was simple, yes, in the way a knife is simple. Single purpose, many uses. He told deadpan jokes and then laughed at them 5 minutes later, as though a separate man inside had caught up. At night by the fire, he argued with the smoke, apologizing and not forgiving in the same breath. He told me once, conspiratorially, "You should paint me without my eyes. Everyone says that's how I look best." "And what do you think?" I asked. I think they are jealous, he said. My eyes are perfectly fine. I can see even the lies. What do my lies look like? Like polite birds, he said. They hop around your ankles. They are very well dressed. Painting the land. The land rolled like a sleeping animal. I painted it in broad, buttery strokes. The brown gold of late grasses, the pale gray bones of trees, stripped clean by wind, a river threading through the belly of it all, silver as a knife and twice as quiet. There is a way to show a place is cold, not by painting white, but by painting the blue of veins under skin and the red of noses, and by dragging a bristle brush dry over gray to suggest frost that never fully leaves. I did that. I painted him small under the bowl of sky, and in the sky I sugared in faint faces, as if clouds had watched too many lives and gotten curious. He didn't see them, or he did, and didn't mention it because they were old friends. Hosting the challenge. We came to towns and hamlets. He posted his challenge with a charmer's gusto. Bring me your best, your middling, your worst. Bring me your champions and your regrets. I will take your heart only if you lose, and even then, I will listen to it first. The joke was a bad one and an old one, but he wrote it like a broom, and men laughed and women spat, and someone always stepped forward. When the bravest lacked nerve, the meaner tried a name instead. "Ricasso Jack!" a mercenary shouted from a parapet. John's gloved fingers went involuntarily to the ricasso and back. "Only when it's too long," he called and did not laugh. Sometimes he spared them. Sometimes he said, "Not you. Your heart is already somewhere else," and patted the disappointed on the shoulder, kind as a baker returning an empty pan. Terms of the wager. "Why spare that one?" I asked, after he let a farm boy go who swung a pitchfork like an apology. I had watched the boy from the start, freckled, coltish, shaking with effort as he took his place in the circle. He had walked out with a smirk of borrowed bravado, puffed up by village whispers, and the hope of making legend. But when John leveled his blade and the air turned serious, I saw it. The crack in the boy's certainty, a slow bleed of confidence replaced by a rising, feral fear. He fought as well as fear allows, which is to say, with desperation, the kind that flails and hopes. Just before the final lunge that would have ended it, the pitchfork slipped in his grip, and his tears came hot and mortified, streaking salt down dust-smudged cheeks. I looked away then, ashamed of the pity rising in my chest, as if it were a betrayal of the canvas waiting on my easel. "He didn't bring what I wagered," John said, and he smiled with his teeth too round. "Those are milk teeth, not worth the trouble. Let the goats eat him first." "Is it moral?" I ventured. "What you do?" "Moral or arithmetic." He leaned in, close enough I could smell the iron tang of his sweat, the rabbit-skin musk of his cloak. His eyes were glassy with 1,000 thoughts clattering. "No," he said. "It is not moral. It is arithmetic. The world is a purse. I shake it and see what falls out." He toed the crust, where earlier a pair of snowy plovers had stitched the flats with their neat little three-toed sums, tally marks marching toward a knot of wind-blown seed. "See? The land keeps its ledger," he said. "Birds write the numbers. Then a fox comes and erases one line with his tail, and the total is different, and no one agrees what was lost." He paused. "Also," he added, "where is my hat?" He looked around wildly. "They took my hat, the ones who talk. They say it's a boat now. They are rowing it to the moon, bastards." Bright threads of paranoia. He sewed his paranoia into our days like a bright thread. He hid bread in the woodpile, coins in the moss, knives in the knotholes of trees. He cached pears beneath cairns and moved them nightly to confuse the wolves that read maps. He counted his steps in primes and would not lace the left boot if its toe pointed west. He licked coins to learn which ones still lie, tapped doorframes twice for luck and once for audit, and left decoy knives where panic could remember them. He folded shirts so they forget who wore them, swapped his hat with a rock to keep them guessing, and listened to his pulse as if it were plural. "Keep the hat mouth down," he'd say, "or the night will drink us." Geese were auditors, moths messengers, bread quiet armor. He trusted me to paint him and suspected me of painting him badly, both at once. Once, by a ditch bright with dragonflies, we shared a heel of bread and a pear and let the day stop performing. No chorus, no jokes, only water talking to stones. He took off his gloves and whittled a stick into nothing. I asked as gently as I knew how, "Is it all an act?" He did not look up. "Some of it," he said. "Some of it is rehearsal for when the real fear arrives. Some of it is the real fear arriving early. If I make the noise, it cannot surprise me." He turned the shavings in his palm like coins. "If it is an act and you paint it, does the painting stop when you leave the room?" "I don't know," I said. "Me neither," he said, and for a while we were only two men eating fruit. Morning training rituals. At dawn, he trained like a man trying to lengthen himself even further. He woke quiet, rolled his spine one vertebra at a time, then folded in half and hung there until the hamstrings let go with a sigh the way old rope does. He worked the joints from wrists to shoulders, small circles that made the tendons pop like taut strings under a bow, then sprang the knees, testing the bad one with a wince and a grin. He wrapped it with a strip of thistle-dyed linen, crossed neat as bookbinding, and rubbed tallow into the skin where the brace bit. Fingers he taped with waxed thread, thin bands at the base, so the knuckles could bloom. Across the knuckles themselves, the skin was thick as acorn caps, a palimpsest of old enthusiasms. He powdered his palms with ground chalk, breathed the dust as if it were a sacrament, and shadow-fenced the morning, long lines drawn through air, the sword an extension of elbow and intent. Footwork he drilled with coins pressed into the salt for markers, stepping a pattern so tight it would have taught a dancer to be mean. Between sets he hung from a wagon's rear rail to let the shoulders settle in their sockets again. Afterward he oiled the scars along his forearms until they shone like lacquered reeds. Only when the breath had steadied, 4 in, hold, 5 out, did he eat. A heel of bread, hard cheese, a pear, if the world was merciful, always with his left hand, so the right could keep flexing its secrets. He talked while he moved, a running ledger of superstitions and stage directions pitched to no one and to everyone. "Left foot, don't freelance," he'd murmur. "Right hand, your payroll, not poetry." To the knee, "I hear you. We'll renegotiate after breakfast." He counted in primes under his breath, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, and hissed in annoyance if a bird's call made him think of an even number. He bowed to the sword as if it were a fussy uncle. "Good morning, long hunger. Try not to eat the wrong thing today." To the air, "Auditors. Please note, today we're filing for restraint. Stamp accordingly." When a breeze lifted the hat brim he set on a fence post, he said, "Stay mouth down. The sky is thirsty." If geese flew over, he saluted them. "Inspectors," he said gravely, "you'll find the books in order, mostly." And once, palming chalk onto his hands, "They say Wednesday is watching. Be kind to Wednesday." painting valor. "Paint me valor," he said once. "Valor is a word," I said. "Paint me a word." So I did. I painted him stepping into a circle chalked in a barn where the stink of hay and manure made an almost holy incense. I painted his sword, its chips catching light like mica in black bread. I painted the muscles of his forearm coiling under speckled scars, the thin taut ropes that snap and release when reach matters more than mass, the wrist bones cocked like a trap ready to spring. I painted his opponent's expression, an old mercenary's face like a well-thumbed book. John spoke to the rafters before the fight. "Yes, yes, I will. I will take only what is offered. Your rules are unfair." He scratched his beard. "Yes, that is your point." When the varnish skinned and the oil stopped smelling like rain on iron, he made me stand it in the yard, and we looked at it together. He bowed to his painted self, and then turned the canvas to face the wall. "Valor should not watch us eat," he said. On the road he used it as a door when the inn had none, as a shade when noon forgot mercy, as a map when he needed a circle to step into. 2 villages on, he pressed it into a farmer's hands in exchange for grain and a promise to keep the chalked circle unbroken. They hung it above their table. In spring, the eldest son plowed the field in arcs and ovals, following the memory of my chalk. The yield was strange and generous. "Good," John said, pleased and far away. "Let the picture do work. Paints ought to feed someone." Prayers over hearts. He won. He often did. He failed sometimes. And when he failed, he lay gasping and bewildered, like a saint surprised by a miracle. But even then he laughed, and the laugh snagged in me like a fishhook. He ate what he won. In my paintings, the hearts were not obscene. They were a color that has no name, the look of a ripe plum if plums were an organ. He said things over them, soft as prayers. "Alric, you liar. I know about the mare you loved like a sister. Little Sif, you were so tired. Mother, I knew we would mat again." That last name always found my hand. The brush would start to chatter on the ferrule as if the bristles had learned to shiver. Some names do that, pull a tremor up the arm the way cold climbs a well rope. They are not the grand names, not saints or captains, but small ones. Mother, boy, sister, barley. When he spoke them, the blue of a ribbon would try to bloom in the underpaint where no ribbon belonged, and I would lay another glaze to drown it and watch it breathe through anyway, patient as mold. We walked north, then east, chasing rumors like cats chase shadows. He wanted to live forever. He believed there was an equation to it, so simple a child could solve it. The right heart, the right number, the right sequence. I kept pace and pretended my hand no longer shook when certain ages appeared in the ledger of his speech. 15, 12. Ages that wear freckles and hiccup when they try to be brave. I lied to my wrist. It did not believe me. "What if it is not the hearts?" I said once. "Then I have eaten for nothing but the taste of it," he replied. "And that is not nothing." He had a way of saying monstrous things that took the jaw clean off your moral apparatus and left it swinging. Naifi Mara on the Daran. On the stone causeway by the river Daran, he met a woman with hair like the charcoal I snap for hatching. She wore no armor, only a boiled leather jerkin and a smile like a stitch. She called herself Naifi Mara and spat in the water before the fight, as a blessing or a curse. John tilted his head, listening to his chorus. "They say you will kill me," he announced. "They say I should run." Mara shrugged. "They're right. They are often right," he told me. "But I don't like what they say today. It feels like borrowed shoes." The duel was fast. It made me angry as a painter, because it gave me no time to plot my colors. They were both made of corners and bad ideas. Her knife found the seam of his greaves. His blade found the air and cut it into lace. He fought like a mast in wind, slender, whippy, impossible to topple, letting the long line of his body do half the work while small, exact muscles in wrist and elbow made the changes no one could see until the result arrived. They laughed together. They were children on a frozen pond, daring each other closer to the dangerous dark middle. He won by accident, if accidents can be shaped into intention by practice. His nicked blade snagged her belt. Her body turned toward him. The geometry of it made her heart easy to find. He cried when he cut it out. He cried harder while he ate. "It is not moral," he said to the water later. He said it to me, to the raft of moonlight floating on the river, to his swallowed choir. "It is not moral. It is necessary. It is arithmetic. It is music. It is a ladder. It is a joke. It is everything it is. It is not enough." He slept then, finally, and snored a little, a domestic, human sound. I painted him as a humbler thing than he imagined himself, a boy asleep in his father's coat. The sword beside him was a saw. I painted the chips as little windows for ghosts to look out of. What became of the Darren canvas? A ferryman nailed it in his boathouse and charged a copper for a look. In flood season, the river lifted it clean off its pegs and ferried it into a reed bed where herons kept it company. A tinker found it warped and framed the warp instead of the picture, driftwood and river twine, and sold it to a woman who had never seen the Darren and never would. She hung it above a dry well and said the room sounded wetter. Reputation and pilgrims. Word of him spread. People came to fight him for glory, or to end the scandal of it, or to prove a thesis about fate. Priests came, with their pockets of salt and strict eyes. He accepted all, and I stood back and blended. The Cinnabar nun with her iron rosary and litany footwork. Glass-hand Tavi, whose fused bottle gauntlet made a little cathedral of reflections. Old Salt Bran, rope-braided and sea-legged, who fought with a belaying pin and the tide. The twins Orin and Ort, one pressing, one peeling. A single spear passed like a breath. Lady of Mirrors in polished scales that made men swing at themselves. Stormscar Errol with a pike long as blame. Kestrel the dancer with crescent knives and ankle bells. A bare-shouldered butcher trying to turn the circle into a stall. The measure maker who fenced in chalked proofs and called out angles as if they were saints, each bringing a grammar of killing, and watched John answer. Reach with angle, mass with hinge, rhythm with rudeness, faith with laughter, mirror with ground, rope with patience, twins with a cut that divided the beat, underpainted, scumbled, and caught him in 40 little epiphanies of ugliness and beauty. I sold some, I kept the best. I am not moral either, provenances and fates. Cinnabar none counting. Given, not sold, to a prior who fed me when the snows were theater quiet. He hung it in the infirmary, the sick counted along with her beads. Soldiers later took it for luck instead of silver. Their captain was seen bargaining with a roadside shrine, trying to trade back a conscience that wouldn't stop tallying. Glass-hand refractions, acquired by the glazier's hall. On the day their great window burst from heat, a fan of fine cracks webbed the paint. An apprentice traced those lines in lead and made a pattern now living in half the city's churches. A saint's bottle glass hand, blessing a street that refuses sobriety. Twins with a spear hung in a brewer's taproom. Brawls improved, fewer plates, better footwork. When taxes bit, he hid it in a cask. At midsummer, the barrel ran red for 3 hours. Pilgrims drank and were brave until morning. He swore never to hide art in thirst again. Stormscar Ascendant, taken as tithe by a bandit lord, and set behind his chair so petitioners could study the wages of pride. One winter, a hungry cousin pulled the canvas to swaddle a newborn. The child lived. The Lord did not see spring. The empty frame became a mirror. The chalk theorem, bought by a schoolmaster who believed children behave better under geometry. They did not. He painted over the blood with proofs. After his death, the town scraped the wall and found my reds arguing with his chalk. They installed the slab in the courthouse. Verdicts since have been quick and often correct, but rarely kind. The long tooth. A relic collector hung it above his bed among saints' splinters and kings' helmets. He dreamt of a bridge over nothing in particular, and sold everything to build it. A span from shade to sun where tired people sit and practice crossing. Lady of Mirrors, bought by a fencing sallet, and mounted floor to ceiling opposite their practice ring. Students learned to strike without flinching at themselves. Injuries fell. Pride did not. In time, the cell covered the walls in burlap for humility. The painting kept shining through. Old Salt Bran bartered to a harbor tavern for a cask and a chart. Sailors swore the tide ran kinder when they drank beneath it. When a gale tore the roof, the canvas stayed nailed to the beam like a vow and turned half the rain aside. Kestrel at half beat. A theater troupe bought it for their green room. The ankle bells in paint rang in dust whenever a performance landed clean. When the troupe broke, a costumer cut the canvas into backings for corsets. Years later, a collector recognized 3 joined panels by the rhythm of the brush and stitched them together. The seam still dances. 2 scenes that haunt. I have seen 2 of the third kind, and they keep my brushes from sleeping. The first was in a market town by a salt road, where the stalls made bright little chapels of onions and rope. The challenger, a cooper with hands like mallets, lost his nerve halfway through and dropped to his knees. He begged. He said please the way a rope says please when it is already tied. He tried to pay with his children's names. John's chorus had no pockets for mercy that day. Arithmetic won. When the cut came, the spray crossed the windwrong and freckled the lower right of my canvas. I wiped once. The red went wider. I let it be. Even now, under varnish and glazing, and any number of respectable browns, that corner blooms at night like a bruise remembering itself. Collectors call it atmosphere. I call it what it is. The cooper's last word I could not hear. Somewhere just above the canvas, the auditor's abacus clicked once and refused to total. The second was worse because it had a witness prepared for pride and given helplessness instead. A village sent its champion, broad as a gate, the pride they had told stories around for years. And he brought his boy to see what winning looks like. The boy had a ribbon tied to his sleeve the color of new corn. He swung his heels on a fence rail and did not blink. There was no story in it. John surpassed him in every measure: angle, timing, length, lie. The man drowned on dry land, too outmatched to even be brave well. The boy watched his father's legend turn into weight and then into silence. Later I found I had painted the boy's eyes into other work without meaning to. A shepherdess, a storm, a bowl of pears. They keep arriving, 2 clear beads threaded through whatever scene I attempt. I do not scrape them out anymore. Some things will not be painted over. They only sink to the ground layer and wait. Some nights they are the fence boys. Some nights they belong to the farm boy who cried into his sleeve. The same 2 lights, traded between them like a burden. And when I am careless, I find I have underpainted a small blue ribbon where no ribbon should be. A farm boy's wager. There was another. No champion, no Cooper, just a farm boy with wrists the size of dowels and sunburn scumbled over freckles. His belt was twine. His boots were his father's, stuffed with straw, a blue ribbon. His sister's, I'd guess, was tied to the pitchfork haft where a grip should be. He walked into the chalk like someone stepping onto a family grave, brave because watched. The village blew courage into him as if a boy were a wineskin. You could see him swell on borrowed breath. Then he saw the blade, and the borrowed air leaped. He watched John level the long tooth and understood, at last, that length could be a clock. Confidence ran out of him visibly, shoulders sliding first, then the jaw loosening, then the hands remembering sweat. His mouth kept trying to form a grin and failing in little spasms, a candle guttering in a draft. He made the fork do what Barnes had taught it, jab, lift, herd, but Barnes are kind liars, and circles are not. I felt pity arrive like sickness. It climbed the spine and made a nest at the throat. My brush hand shook so badly, I palmed the charcoal to hide it. I wanted to step forward and ransom him with whatever voice I owned. The crowd, good people, my people, leaned in with that soft, awful murmur that sounds like prayer until you hear the arithmetic in it. The gods came nosing at the edge of the chalk like strays. Wednesday laid a cool palm between the boy's shoulders that could not settle his breath. No sleeves smelled of clean iron and said work square. The auditor's unseen beads clicked once, file under mercy if possible, and then fell silent. The wolf waited where the line bent, offering a longer way there was no time to take. The moon left 2 faint, wet rings in the dust beside the fallen blue ribbon, and nobody saw them but me. John tried, in his sideways mercy, to make it a story the boy could leave. "What's your crop?" he asked, as if weather might interrupt tragedy. "Barley," the boy said, and startled at his own voice. It broke on the one word and left a small hurt hanging in the air. "Good," John answered. "Then we are kin. I am thresher, and you are grain. We will both work hard." He smiled, and I hated him for being kind in the wrong direction. They moved. The fork came honest and clumsy. The sword returned an education. When Steele kissed the sleeve and wrote a red comma there, the boy's mouth folded inward like paper. His eyes filmed. He said, "Wait." Once not to John, but to the day itself, as if time might be persuaded to add back an hour of childhood. He hiccuped, a small, helpless sound that children make when grief outruns breath. And the tears began, hot and mortifying, streaking mud into clean, pale tracks. "I don't want," he said, and could not find the end of the sentence. Pity did not change the math. Desperation made him brave in the way drowning things are brave. He rushed, swinging the fork like a gate he meant to close against weather. John's correction looked like mercy until you followed the line. The boy's feet tangled with the idea of themselves. His boot, his father's, caught the chalk and scraped it into a small white storm. He sobbed once, a child sound in a room of adult silence. Somewhere behind us, a woman made the sound mothers make into their hands when they have chosen not to scream. John took him quickly. He was not cruel about it. He was efficient, which is worse. The blue ribbon fluttered down and lay on the salt like a sky too tired to be sky. I have learned that pity does nothing for speed. I painted him later as he looked the heartbeat before the end, the fork tilting away, the soft-lipped courage collapsing, the eyes huge and terribly new. I did not paint the ribbon. I could not look at it. In the lower right, the varnish will not stop blooming. Old red freckles through as if the cooper's last word had cousins, and they had brought bread. People tell me the boy looks almost relieved. That is my guilt, not his. Relief belongs to those who get to keep their names. John ate with his eyes closed and said very softly, "Barley," as if tasting a season, and then, quieter still, "Forgive me," which may have been to the harvest or to the boy or to himself. I thought then that forever is a poor excuse for anything, and that ledgers should be burned rather than balanced. Paint me forever. Once when we were eating wild pears that tasted like sand and forgiveness, he stared at my hands and said very quietly, "Paint me forever." I can only paint long. "I will fight you," he said. He said it like a man asking for a dance. "Your heart is clever. It tells good stories. It is dressed as a bird. If I eat it, I will live a very long time." The pears were stones in my mouth. "I am not a fighter," I said. "You are," he said. "I have seen you duel with a horizon and win. I have seen you stab a sky and drain it onto cloth. You cut people open and hang their insides on walls, and everyone claps." I laughed, and the laugh could have been a sob if someone had painted it with a heavier hand. "And if you win?" "I eat you. I listen to you forever. I laugh better. I stop being lonely." "And if I win?" He considered. He frowned at the invisible advisors who lived under his hat, which was lying beside him full of pears. "You get my sword," he said at last. "I am not a brave man. I am cowardly, and very good at that. But here is a thing about living with a man like Meagre John for months. You start to imagine rules. I had begun to think that if I painted him exact enough, if I got his edges clean, I could anchor him. I had begun to think that if I refused, he would one day turn to me with the same grin he gives an opponent, and the arithmetic would tabulate, and I would become a number. I said yes. The amphitheater duel. We chose a place that would paint well. A ruined amphitheater pressed into a hillside where ivy drank marble and a pool had collected water so still that stars practiced in it before the night. From the Letheran Evening Gazette, broadsheet number 422. Third frost month, year 172. Price, 1/2 copper. City's pride, the marble bowl, shines again. Lithara, the amphitheater upon the east hill, freshly lime-washed and fitted with cedar rails, last night hosted a crowd, as numerous as bees and twice as tuneful, said the master of revels. Red ochre numerals now mark every tier for decent order. Bronze visages of comedy and tragedy, newly polished, preside above each vomitorium. The orchestra floor, a cunning mosaic of riverfish and laurel, gleamed under sandal and petal. Vendors poured watered wine from copper kettles that kept snug heat. The air smelt of resin and sugared almonds. A whisper on stage climbed to the highest bench without losing a syllable, to the wonder of several old men who argued acoustics and lost. Swallows, observing propriety, rearranged themselves upon the cornice when the cithara sounded. On market days, the bowl will admit banners, 10 colors at least, to teach the wind its letters. By ordinance of council, brass basins shall mirror the boat-hatted moon on festival nights, this being good for debts, and better, some say, for vows. Rain has been persuaded into cunning drains, which sing when pleased. Children may practice applause in the forenoon, hawkers to keep the steps sweet thereafter. Brave is the city whose boasts return as music, proclaimed the Archon, to modest cheering. Advertisement. Sweet almonds in paper horns sold at the South Stair. Sharp knives honed while you wait by Licinius. No nicks sworn. Lost. 1 kid glove, left. Reward in kisses. Apply to row J. A brown waterline crosses the column here. Several words are eaten. Ink has crawled. In the margin, a child drew a lion's spout. From the road, a superior mirage kept lying to us about the place, lifting the broken tears into a full, cheering audience, then drowning them in a lake that wasn't there, then returning them bare and honest when the air remembered itself. John waved to the phantom crowd and bowed, deadly courtly. When the seats vanished, he winced as if someone had withdrawn a promise. I prepped 3 canvases, one to paint the field before, one to paint the field after, and one to paint nothing but him. Rules for the duel. He spoke to his gods. He took off his hat and addressed them politely, as if to neighbors over a fence. He named them in a roll call he never changed. The auditor, who keeps sums and tallies. The god with no sleeves, who minds work and weather. The wolf who reads maps, who governs shortcuts and mistakes. The Wednesday wife, patron of patience between beginnings and ends. And the boat-hatted moon, who owns tides, debts, and every cup left out in rain. He set out the usual offerings on a flat stone, a coin licked clean, a thread of wax for the ferule, a crumb of bread for armor, a pear seed, and 3 grains of salt. Be good, he told them. Don't scare him. He gets shaky. He paints best when he thinks he is safe. They answered, somewhere between wind and throat clearing. I heard only his half most days, but on calm air their replies arrived like small receipts. From the auditor, a click of unseen beads. Count him slow. File under mercy when possible. Yes, John said. We're filing for restraint. Please stamp accordingly. From no sleeves, the smell of rain on iron and a voice like calloused palms. Work clean. If you must break, break square. I will try, he said. I am bad at square. From the wolf, a pad in the dust just outside the chalk. Take the long way to mercy. If you cannot, leave breadcrumbs for the next regret. I have only pears, he murmured. They go brown. From Wednesday, cool and patient. Begin twice, finish once. Spare anything that hiccups when it is brave. He winced. You saw the boy. From the moon, a wet brightness in the eye and a tilt in every cup. Keep the hat mouth down. Liquids remember. So do painters. I remember, he said softly. He remembers too much. He touched my sleeve without looking, then to all of them at once. If I lose, let it be honest. If I win, let it be small. He nodded, listening, and smiled in that wrong, glad way of his. Understood. No thumbs today. I am here, I said. I know, he agreed. I always know where everything I love is. That is why it hurts so much when I lose. How the gods appear. He said they rarely kept faces, but when the air held still, I learned to spot them anyway. The auditor came as shadow abacus, a ladder of dark beads sliding across sunlit dust, clicking softly even when no wind moved. Sometimes numbers pricked the skin like sleet. When he frowned, ledgers smelled faintly of vinegar and iron. The god with no sleeves arrived as rolled forearms and a warm draft that tasted of rain on anvils. He left thumbprints in wet clay, squared torn edges, tied knots that would not slip. When he approved, tools put themselves away. The wolf who reads maps patted in as mislaid footprints and roots that bent a little kinder. He gnawed corners off charts, tore the shortest line, and left crumbs of pear for later regret. His breath fogged only at crossroads. The Wednesday wife was a hush of cool linen and kettle steam, the steady weight of a hand on the back of a neck until panic learned to breathe. Threads crossed themselves when she passed, knots untangled with a sigh. The boat-hatted moon tipped cups and made two pale water rings appear where there had been none. He wore a crescent like a skiff and kept every tide, debt, and teardrop on a quiet chain. When he listened, silver thickened around edges. They were not kind or cruel, only busy. John treated them like co-workers in a dangerous shop. Salute and advance. From the broken tears, the chorus in his skull tried a fresh cruelty. Forever John. He flinched, a blink and miss it, and misbuttoned his left cuff, as if to unfasten the name. We saluted with the solemnity of boys pretending at knighthood. He moved toward me like a door pushed by wind, long shins laying out distance, long arms gathering it back, all hinge and lever and borrowed momentum, the patient geometry of a tall man who has learned to make length into surprise. Mid-swing, he choked up on the ricasso, gloved fingers pinching steel for a heartbeat to shorten the lever. Then he slid back to the pommel and let it pendulum, turning the blade's foolish length into a metronome that told only our deaths the time. Audience, please observe the wrist, he told the air, cheerful and doomed. Wrist is where the lies live. He glanced past me, smiling at nothing. Yes, I see you. No, we are not doing thumbs today. I had my palette knife. People laugh at a palette knife until it is in their ribs. I threw paint in his eyes, not for blindness, but to give me time to move. He laughed. Excellent choice of value, he said. Cool against warm, tragic harmony. He was so glad. Palette knife against a long sword. We danced. He made a little music with his sword, a tin clatter. Twice he corrected an overlong cut with ugly, effective footwork, two stuttered half-steps that kept the blade from dragging him down, and once he let the backhand creep an inch to tune the arc. The way a luthier listens with fingertips instead of ears, he spoke in stage notes between breaths. Left foot, quieter. Elbow, tell fewer jokes. Audience, this is called a bad idea, executed beautifully. When a raven barked, he nodded to it. Judge, he told the amphitheater, if I die, keep my hat mouth down. To me, wincing and delighted, now I'm going to try something that only works when I'm wrong. I made a little mess with linseed oil and fear. I'm not the worst with a blade. You cannot paint hands for 20 years and not understand tendons. But he was better. He was laughing and weeping and narrating for the audience in his chest. Now, he told them, I will die. He fainted and then apologized to the faint. You deserved better. He parried my knife with the leather of his glove and said, that's a Thursday answer. We need a Monday. Somewhere a wind shifted and he whispered, Wednesday, don't look. Yielding the sword. He misstepped. Knees betray. Knees go into business for themselves. He misheard the counsel. Or they lied. I caught the inside of his forearm with the knife, and he dropped the sword. It fell like a bell and lay there. Ridiculous, a long tooth knocked out of a ridiculous mouth. He knelt, not in surrender or prayer, but because the body knows when to be low. Ah, he said to no one. Here we are. You yield? My voice had become the brush stroke that defines the edge of a cheekbone, precise, affectionate, terrified. He nodded. To me, not to them. I told them to let me lose. I told them you paint best when you win. Paint me winning then. Paint me losing. Paint me exactly how I am, and then I will be both. He smiled at nothing, as if the sum had settled. Yielding is only a posture. The fighter still killed them. Zero sum and the sword. I did not cut out his heart. I am not moral, but I am close enough to it to know that some arithmetic ends in zero. Instead, I took his sword. It is heavier than honesty. It is notch-backed, a gnawed river of iron. When you hold it, you feel old fights humming in it, coins dropped in a well that has not yet hit bottom. He watched me fail to lift it one-handed and laughed politely, like a man at a wake who is trying to be kind. Before that day, I had watched him in the granary at Briceford, torches smoking, dust keeping count in the beams. Barley hissed underfoot. Each step made a small subtraction. His opponent wore butcher's leather and a red scarf that kept licking an old nick at her throat. He let her drive him along the bins and answered by making the building do work. A post to turn on, a ladder to kick, a shadow to steal a beat. When her cleaver rang against a grain ring, the whole room answered, and for a breath the dust hung perfectly still, as if even the air had decided not to interfere. He finished her quickly, and God helped me, kindly. He held the heart like a warmed bird, told it had been brave, and ate as if reading. 3 chews, 3 pages. I did not paint that fight. The canvas refused it. The memory did not. Keep it, he said. Hang it over your bed like a bad dream. Paint it as a horizon. Parting and relic. He stood and walked away. I painted his back with thick strokes, palette knife lifting ridges of lead white and brown madder so the coat keeps weather like bark. I painted the dust his boots picked up, stippled with pumice in the medium so the grit is real when the light goes low. I painted the air that closed behind him, with the tender professionalism of a tailor altering a suit to outlive its wearer, glazing indigo into the negative space until the absence had weight. Around that narrow figure, I built a cathedral of small truths. The seam below the right shoulder where the thread is darker, the slack in the scabbard strap where the missing sword used to pull, a fan of boot prints thinning toward the horizon like notes at the end of a hymn. The ground was rabbit skin and chalk, the sky a wash of Prussian dreaming through Naples and ash. I let the last highlights pool like melted coins along the shoulders, so he seems almost spendable. News of that canvas traveled wrong and far. Warriors, captains, saints of the alley came with purses and promises, and the heavy perfumes of their houses. They begged to be painted. They offered silk, land, reliquaries, their names set down in gold leaf. I told them what I tell everyone. If you win him, I will be your painter. Time and time again, I set a fresh panel aside for them, and time again, I never touched it. The men, the women, and those who wore neither word comfortably went into the circle bright with certainty and left it lighter by a heart. He ate. I watched. The panels stayed blank. In this painting, I kept them as the things the eye does not at first notice, a loosened loop of dust where someone fell just out of frame, a ribbon blue vein that keeps surfacing through the varnish, though no brush remembers laying it. A widened silence behind his shoulders, spacious enough to hold a choir that is missing. Their riches bought nothing. Their begging bought a rule. Only victory buys a portrait, and victory never came. Legend on the move. He is out there, still somewhere, unless he is not. We have walked him across big, indifferent rooms of earth, the winter salt flats where hoarfrost rims hexed plates and the breath tastes of pennies, the stubble fields where crows do their black bookkeeping, the river causeways of the Darren where light practices in the shallows, hedge roads stitched with rag flags and pear windfalls, basalt that keeps last summer's heat like a grudge, chalk downs that sheep turn into pale arithmetic. Dust writes our names wrong and erases them before noon. Parhelia braid themselves at his shoulders. Virga keeps promising rain to far hills. A superior mirage lifts the towns ahead into ships, then lets them sink when the air remembers itself. The auditor's beads click in wagon ruts. No sleeves, smells of rain on anvils along the ditches. The wolf bends the road around a wet meadow and leaves pear crumbs for later regret. Wednesday lays a cool palm between the shoulder blades and teaches breath. When we stop, pears taste of sand and forgiveness. When we move, our shadows learn to breathe at different speeds. He is asking for hearts, or he has moved on to thumbs. He is bargaining with gods who do not sign contracts. He is marrying the dead and sleeping in their voices. Interlude, the banner's pupil. He came to the circle with the posture the banner had taught him. Chin tipped like the painted hero, feet set in that flattering fatal third that looks good in pigment and risky in weather. He had practiced beneath the copy the plasterers hung on festival days. You could see the canvas in his ankles, the poster in his wrists. His cuts were beautiful lies, angles that had learned themselves from cloth. John watched him enter the chalk and winced, almost fatherly. My fault, he murmured to me. I put that stance in the world. The boy moved well, better than most. The banner had taught him courage and a grammar of length. It had not taught him how mornings differ from afternoons, or how knees forget, or how wind undoes a silhouette. Twice he nearly had John with an angle borrowed from paint. The third time, John changed the rhythm by a breath, and the beauty cracked. Pictures are excellent teachers, he said, as he caught the blade and turned it. They forget to teach weather. When it ended, the boy lived. John touched the ribbon at the boy's sleeve, the same festival blue, and said, "Hang your banner in a barn. Let it teach hay to stand straighter. Learn from mud a while." The boy nodded, swallowing pride and a sob, and the circle kept its arithmetic for another day. Interlude, the magistrate's letter. Weeks later, a magistrate arrived with ink on his cuffs and sleep gone from his eyes. He had been the one years back who hung the romantic portrait above the bench so verdicts could feel taller. "It worked," he told me, in a voice that sounded like an empty docket. "Too well. Mercy learned to whisper." He set a folded letter on my table and a small purse beside it that I pushed back toward him. The letter said only, "I resign." I keep seeing the bead eyes where no eyes are. I have ruled with a picture in my head, and it has begun to rule back. I'm going to teach my children how to mend nets. He did not ask for his portrait back. He did not ask for absolution. He asked if the varnish ever stops blooming in the lower right. "No," I said. "It is a weather." He nodded as if a season had finally been named and left his seal on the table by mistake. I keep it in a drawer with dried pears and a bit of chalk. After images and edges. I kept painting him after. I painted him against skies the color of drowned coins. I painted him small in big lands so people would remember scale. I painted him exaggerated enough that anyone who had met him would squint and say, "Yes, that's him," cruel and funny and all edges. I painted his thoughts, which look like oil when it first hits water, thick, swirling, iridescent, disgusting, beautiful, never mixing with anything clean. I painted his sword carefully, each chip a legend I chose not to read aloud. Once I set down a duel entire. Salt circle at Astor Flats, the chalk hissing under boots, the air tasting of pennies, plovers stitching three-toed sums along the edge while two figures worked the problem in steel. I dragged a dry bristle over gray to show frost that never leaves, sifted powdered chalk into the medium so the circle itself would keep whispering, and pinned the exact half beat before the cut divided the day. His nicked edge kissing her sleeve, her short knife catching a coin-small sun. They called it beautiful. It is a ledger page. Later I set another, rain cobbles at third bell. A duel painted on wet stone where lanterns trembled in puddles and every step had a double. I glazed the ground in thin greens and smoky ambers so reflections would keep breathing under the scene. I knife-lifted tiny ridges of lead white along the slick edges to make the street feel newly shaved. He fought a woman in butcher's leather who kept a cleaver low and the city's salt in her stance. The rain evened them. His reach lost inches to the puddles. Her footwork found them and learned to surf. I held the moment when his parry threw a starburst of water up the side of her jaw, and she smiled because the cold woke her nerve. The next beat turned the puddles to red rosettes, arterial lace blown flat across the cobbles. While the gutters learned a pink, the city keeps secret until rain. In the far left, I left a window bright with soup steam and a child's hand on glass. People say the steam warms the painting. It does not. It keeps score in fog. Then I painted the bloodiest I could bear, red sump, third tier. A pit built of shale where brine wept from the stone, and men called it salt, not tears. I mixed lake iron and alizarin until the Reds argued, then let them both be right. He fought a chain man who swung weight like a sermon. Every hit came with a small thunder of links. The first cut did not spray. It pasted. The second made a net on the ground that caught no one. I dragged hog bristle through the wet to put grit into the shine so the eye would taste metal. Where the chainman's pulse opened, it wrote a braided spray up the shale like cursive. The outer droplets dried to iron brown first. The center kept its lacquer. The floor pooled toward the drain in slow ellipses, and every boot that crossed left a squeegeed crescent, a ledger of exits. The crowd loved the arithmetic louder there. Their throats came home raw. In the corner I painted a bucket upended and a handprint sliding down the stave. No one asks about the hand. They ask how I got the red to stay awake. Answer, I kept it company. What it caused? Weeks later, a woman found me with the chainman's widow at her shoulder. She said the pit's owner had bought the picture for his private room, and laughter grew louder there while bread grew thinner. The widow asked me to sell it back at a loss to dignity. I tried. The owner refused. The next spring, the shale tier slumped after a hard rain, and the pit shut for a season. Men said it was weather. The widow, who had taken to hanging wet ropes as curtains, said ropes remember when hands let go. I painted her once, just the ropes, drying into quiet lines. For pity, I learned to go smaller. Barn heft at Lammas, a torchlit circle chalked over trampled straw, dust counting in the beams. His opponent was a miller's son with wrists like thin dowels, and a ribbon tied to courage where a grip should be. When the blade wrote a single comma in his sleeve, the boy hiccuped that terrible child sound, and the room forgot how to breathe. I set the moment before the end, pitchfork tipping away, jaw trying to make a grin and making weather instead, two clear eyes new as frost. In paint the torches gutter inward, ashamed of their own light. Collectors call it atmosphere. It is a mistake carried honestly. What it caused, the barn's chalk circle never quite erased. Couples came to stand inside it and whisper vows because standing there made the heart count slower. A year on, a child was born in that barn during a windstorm. The midwife swore the dust held still for the crowning so the baby could find the breath. Mera Fentime caught the child, steadied the father, and left a ribbon-blue thread tied to the post for luck. The farmer wrote to say they keep the ribbon in the rafters. On Lammas they lower it and tie it to the new scythe. He says the fields behave. And once, soft as a tide, wharf at Neep, moon low, boats ticking against their posts like metronomes with kind hearts. I mixed pearl gray with breath to lay down the water and let the masts keep the measure. She fought him in sleeves rolled to the elbow, no sleeves smiling somewhere in the rope work. They moved like a duet that had argued and forgiven each other already. When the cut came, it was a courtesy. 2 threads parted from a cuff, a bead of bright at the wrist that did not fall. He bowed. She laughed. I left their shadows joined on a plank where they had overlapped without noticing. People stand before that canvas and whisper, as if the boats will hear their secrets and row them gently away. What it caused? Wharfmen claim that on neap tides the plank in the picture shows joined shadows, whether or not anyone stands there. Lovers leave notes under the frame, asking the moon for lenient debts. Sometimes they return to find 2 pale water rings on the matting. A cooper's apprentice swore the piece kept him from breaking a promise. He turned back from a bad voyage because the shadows looked tired. I do not argue with the tide. I frame it. Then there were the ones that would not sit still under a single virtue. Jewels that kept changing color in the mind. Tithe at Newmarket. They drew the circle on market chalk, between tally booths and barrels of purple onions. His challenger wore a creditor's sash. The debtor stood behind him, wrists tied with braided receipts. The rule was plain. If the debtor's champion fell, the heart paid the balance. John offered coin to break the math. The bondholder refused. Principle, he said. They fought quick and almost polite. When the creditor fell, John took the debtor's champion's heart instead. Terms are terms, he told the ledger in the air, and pressed half the purse into the widow's hand and half into the debtor's. I painted the sash lying across both piles like a thin red bridge. What it caused? The boothmen changed their contracts. Hearts were no longer acceptable surety, on paper. In practice, they began to require champions who could not afford to lose. Mercy privatized. Arithmetic kept its teeth. First blood at Sagram Vale. By ordinance, it was to first blood only. The Vale had had enough funerals. He nicked his opponent's thumb and bowed, but the crowd, thirsty with old grief, chanted, "Heart, heart," and the chorus in his chest took up the meter. He asked the gods for a ruling. The auditor clicked twice. He took the heart cleanly and laid the body at the foot of the ordnance post. I varnished the nick and the statute with the same thin shine, so they argued forever. What it caused? The council repealed first blood by mourning to avoid confusion. None was avoided. Years later, a child asked why the post still smells of iron in rain. No one answered. Mara Fentime was there. She stitched the thumb of the first man cut, and before she left, tied a single ribbon blue hair to the ordnance post so the law would remember skin. The healer's wager. A fever-ringed village brought their wise woman forward. She offered her own heart if it would break the sickness. Eyes steady as a basin. He refused, and the voices did not. We argued in a low room that smelled of thyme and ash until kindness ran out of language. He took her heart as if accepting a tool. The fever eased with the season, as fevers do. I painted her mortar and pestle on a shelf beside a bowl of pears. Sometimes the pears rot sooner in that room. What it caused? Each solstice they leave a ribbon blue thread and a sprig of thyme on the threshold. Mara Fentime, the new midwife and once apprentice to the lost wise woman, tells me the babies come anyway. So do the funerals. The arithmetic remains, only quieter. She will turn up again, at Lammas in the barn, and later at Sagram Vale with a needle and a law on her lap. Proxy at Orek Gate. The tyrant sent a mercenary wrapped in his colors. The writ said Victor may claim redress against the issuer by law. John read it twice. then fought the proxy hard and honest, and ended him fast. He bowed to the colors and rode to Orek. The tyrant would not receive him. I did not paint what happened next. I painted a gate with its hinges newly oiled and a courier at dawn with a parcel he refused to open. What it caused, Orek instituted a ban on dueling by proxy and built a statue to due process that looks like a man trying not to run. The courier never married and kept a sealed box under his bed until he died. The lid, when lifted, smelled faintly of pears and iron. Mercy with a tail. In one barn he chose mercy, cut low and outward to spare the life, and take the hand that kept refusing bread. The man lived a week and died of river rot. I painted the spared heart on a plate and the empty sleeve tied twice. People call it kindness. The title is a lie I let breathe. What it caused? The barn banned blades and kept a stack of willow switches by the door. Boys took beatings there instead of legends. Fewer funerals, more limps. Which ledger should I bless? Further works and provenances. Ledger at dawn, Briceford Granary, dust counting in torch beams, barley hissing like paper, his hand mid-parry, the latter already thinking of falling, bought by the Millers' Guild, set above the scales. Weighings grew slower and they say, truer. In spring, a boy traced the dust beams with chalk and invented a safer way to stack sacks. The Guild calls it the quiet invention. Pear blue still life with mortar. The wise woman's mortar beside a bowl of pears, one ribbon blue thread caught under the lip. Given to the midwife's house. Babies sleep better in that room. Pears rot faster. Meraphantime leaves a sprig on the frame at solstice and writes no note. Window of soup steam, a square of glass, breathing on a rain street night. A small handprint blooming and fading. 2 lanterns doubled into puddles until the city looks like it wants to forgive itself. Hung in a poorhouse kitchen, the window never fogs fully now, as if the picture keeps a part of the view clear for finding lost people in the rain. Gate, newly oiled. Orek's east gate at first light, hinges shining like wet lips. A courier at the margin with a parcel he refuses to open, purchased for the council hall. The statue of due process, photographs, better with it behind. The stone looks almost ready to breathe. No one admits why oil rations increased after. Ropes drying, quiet lines. Just ropes on pegs. The widow's curtains of salt pit memory, a wind line in each strand where a hand once let go. She would not take coin. She kept the painting in her stairwell, and it stopped the worst of the damp. Men coming up from the pits touched the frame and counted to 3 before speaking. Joined shadows, study, plank and pilings, the suggestion of 2 silhouettes overlapping where no one stands. The harbor master bought it for his office and swears it keeps him from scheduling departures on Niep tides. Lovers leave notes under this one, too. The moon keeps its own books, sword as horizon. His long tooth laid along the lower third, the world arranged to admit its length. Clouds like arithmetic above it. A bridge builder traded me a span of his first arch for it. He hung the painting at the work yard. The crew began to check line and plumb twice, then once again for luck. The bridge does not sing in wind the way others do. Dust counting in beams, Lammas barn, a square of torchlight with motes doing their small math. No figures, only the circle and a ribbon blue ghost of pigment surfacing where no brush remembers it. A school took it for their entryway. Children fall quiet beneath it without knowing why, and learn to add by listening first. Mortal arithmetic, selected panels. Matin's bell, bell knife. A girl barely to her 17th winter, hair braided with church twine. Her bell-hilt dagger rang when it struck his guard. I caught the instant before the sound finished, her mouth set like a stanza, his blade writing the last line, inked in blood that came quick and bright. I was there, frost still on the flagstones behind the foundry, crows auditioning for omens on the roof. She kissed the iron clapper for luck and stepped into the chalk. He said, almost kindly, "Don't let the bell choose your timing." She smiled like a secret and chose it anyway. First clinch, metal on metal, a clear E that hung between them like a question. Second pass, a lower note, almost a vow. Third, the cut, clean and inevitable. A hot seam opened at the collar and misted the cold, little threads of steam where the breath left. She tried to bind with the hilt. The bell rang again, choked now, and took a crescent of blood along its rim that dried to brown like old bronze. The rope drank a thin line, and the frost hissed pink around their boots. His guard dripped. The dagger fell and struck the stone with a choking ring as blood freckles took the chalk. The bell went silent as if ashamed to name it. The artery beat twice on the cold, two hard pulses that feathered a fan across the frost, each arc finer at the edge where breath thinned it. The spray freckled the foundry wall in a rise and fall pattern a constable could have counted. The puddle, once it learned the grout lines, ran obediently downhill and made a dark lip against the step. When they lifted her, the print of her shoulder stayed behind, warm longer than skin has any right to be, purchased by the bell founders. On cold mornings, the casting hall hums at that pitch before the furnaces wake. What it caused, they added a thin bronze rib to their great bells, so the E rides funerals like a second breath. In weddings, apprentices swear they hear the higher note, her first pass, if the air is kind. Old grain elder, a white-bearded man who had measured barley his whole life and wanted one last sum to come out even. He had apprenticed in a low-roof granary where mornings smelled of damp hemp and mouse mint. By 30, he could call a bushel by the sound it made hitting the bin. He married a rope-maker's daughter who kept the books in a tidy hand and died in a cold snap between two harvests. He kept the books after, his figures upright even as his back began to bow. He raised a son who went to the river and wrote twice, and a daughter who stayed to teach the scales to be fair. The tide kept the rest of the letters. On levee years, he stood between boothmen and farmers and lost the argument, but made it slower. His stance was wrong, the stance of someone never gifted to war, who had lost often and kept fighting anyway, but his eyes apologized to no one. He wore work's small scars, spline cuts along the thumb, flower burns on the wrist, and his wedding cord on the right hand because the left was for the beam. I painted the bow of his back and the straightness of his will, the cut arriving like punctuation. The day of it smelled of chaff and wet rope. Grain dust hung like sunlit fog. Every step wrote little avalanches along the piles. He weighed his own breath with his hands before stepping in, as if testing bushels. John said, "Grandfather, I can walk away." The elder shook his head. "We finish what we start, even mistakes." First bind. Steel scraped the beam weight and made the scale yelp. Second pass, a nick at the forearm, not deep, bright as a kernel. Third, the ledger closed. Blood ran into the dust and turned it to paste, clumping like dough on the flagstones. A single drop struck the brass of the counterweight and rang a dull note. The pointer quivered to center, as if the scales themselves had agreed to the total. When they lifted him, a dark print of his shoulder curved the dust like the negative of a crescent moon. He weighed his own breath with his hands before stepping in, as if testing bushels. John said, "Grandfather, I can walk away." The elder shook his head. We finish what we start, even mistakes. The blades touched once, twice. On the third, the ledger closed, hung in the Briceford weighhouse. The scales creak less when storms threaten. What it caused, the weighers stopped rounding up for the city and down for the poor. They set a new middle, grain honest, they call it. In famine years, the elder's granddaughter reads the tariff aloud in that room so no one pretends not to hear. Apricot clerk, ink still wet on his cuff, ledger ribbon tucked behind one ear. He fought tidy, as if neatness were armor. His life had been a long ritual of fear, avoiding confrontation, apologizing before offense, binding safety in margins and footnotes. He had considered ending it once, ledger open to an empty page, but stopped short, ashamed he had never dared anything at all. Today, he told himself, he would at least try to end with bravery, even if borrowed, even if clumsy. His hands shook when he stepped in, not with rage, but the fragile tremble of someone doing something unnatural to their own nature. He thought about ink, how it dries, how it records, how it stains. Maybe dying was a kind of signature. Maybe the gods, who never initialed amendments, would at least read the attempt. He fought as he lived, careful, tentative, too late. But there was a moment, brief as breath, where his blade met the other cleanly, and he thought, this is how courage feels. Then it was gone. The riposte took him low. A tidy line opened at the belly like a seam unpicked. He tried to hold it shut with both hands, as if pressing blotting paper to a spill. Blood came warm and embarrassed, soaking the ribbon behind his ear until it bled dye. A drop ticked off his cuff, fell on the chalk, and made a period where the circle had wanted a comma. The heart was quick to blush. I glazed the apricot skin with a whisper of madder and left a smudge on the ledger's margin where a dying thumb tried to finish the line. In life he kept saying, just one correction, and tried to rewrite the terms between feints. The gods do not initial amendments. When he fell, the ledger slid under him, so his last weight would balance the page. The circle smelled faintly of gall ink and iron for an hour after. The city archive keeps it in a reading room. Borrowers return books on time there. What it caused, the comptrollers added a rule: no contracts signed within earshot of a duel, and no ledgers kept on a dueling green. Compliance is imperfect. Annotations are not. Margins in that quarter now fill with tiny prayers disguised as footnotes. Widow in red scarf. Middle years, and a throat nick old as her grief. She moved like a woman who had arranged heavy furniture alone. She had never married, never borne children, not for lack of offers, but because her heart had once fixed itself to another girl with wind-wild hair and a laugh that turned chores into music. They'd made plans once in the reckless promise of 16 to follow caravans, see snow fall in the south, sleep under different stars every week. But the girl caught fever the spring after, and the maps folded themselves back up. She wore her grief like a scarf and never took it off. So she stayed and worked and aged in her strength. But some part of her, the part that once knotted ribbons to tent poles and kissed behind orchard sheds, refused to die quiet. That part came with her to the circle. She did not expect to win, only to end as she had once dreamed, on the edge of a story. He bowed to the scarf before the work. I set her left hand stubborn on the cleaver and her right forgiving nothing. On the floor, the circle smelled of spilled onions and fairy rope. She kept the cleaver low, hunting tendon. When he slid inside her, reached the old nick along her throat, opened a stitch from strain, and drew a thin line. When the real cut came, high guard beaten down, wrist turned, Blood took the short way. It sheeted off the cleaver's spine and webbed between her fingers. Each pulse flung a fan across the planks that hit the bucket and climbed it in rungs. Her scarf went dark in a spreading flower, and then darker at the edges where salt had dried in the weave. I painted the line the river water made when it met the puddle. Clean-cutting dirty, the red folded back like a tide embarrassed into the grain. A ferry guild bought it and swears river fog parts around the frame. In the years after, the guild's elders told her story in the long light of taverns, how she'd carried love like a promise she never meant to keep quiet, how she'd spoken, on the morning of the duel, to the girl in her memory, asking if the wind still felt like freedom, if the afterlife had caravans and salt air. They said she laughed once before the blades crossed, a laugh that startled the river birds and whispered, "I'm coming, finally, with a good story to tell you." What it caused, bargemen began washing decks with the current instead of against it. Let the river carry it, they say. In the guild hall, a thin diagonal of darker wood has appeared beneath the painting, as if liquid keeps remembering the way down. Grandmother with blue salt, hair white as brine, palms tattooed with kitchen burns. She challenged for a grandson who would never come home. Her baker's apprentice boy conscripted in the spring levy and killed 3 winters prior in the border war at Sagram Vale. She kept his last letter folded in the blue salt tin, the paper smelling of yeast and soot, with a ribbon blue thread from the festival he missed tucked inside. She came to the circle to trade her fear for a story he would have called brave. At the chalk, I tried to stop him. "Not this one," I said. "Let her go home." The plea wasn't art. It was a mistake that knew itself. He did not look at me. "You record," he said, simple and cold. "I decide." She did look, steady as a hearth that has outlived a winter. "Paint what happens," she said, "not what you beg for." Then she stepped in and put the blue salt tin in her apron pocket like a promise. The yard smelled of flour, singed hair, and damp ash. Bakers had chalked the circle with a sugar scoop. Flour drifted off every cuff like slow snow. She held an oven peel as if it were a round shield, and a baker's lame razor set in a walnut handle, like a short, sensible truth. He saluted with the long tooth. Somewhere a bell on a cart strap rang once and decided not to ring again. Her footwork was kneading, press, fold, quarter turn, rest. The peel took his first cut on the edge and splintered in a clean crescent. Flour leapt in a white gasp and settled in their hair as if age had claimed them both. He advanced in levers and hinges, correcting a too long swing with those ugly half-steps that turn physics into consent. She let him overreach and answered with the lame, a neat, bright line across the knuckles that wrote proof in red and stung him into honesty. He smiled, wrong and glad. The chorus in his chest clicked its beads. The auditor filed something under mercy if possible, and then stopped speaking. I spoke again, cowardice dressed as counsel. "Please," I said, to both. To neither. There are braver stories. "Begin," he said. "Begin," she agreed, stern, without ceremony, and they did. He changed levels and slid along the peel the way heat slides along iron. The lame nicked his sleeve and found nothing vital. His blade found the rim of the peel again and shaved it down to a bitten moon. She shoved, heel to toe, the way you put a heavy loaf back into the heat when it tries to sag. He yielded a breath and then took back 2. The peel split under a third cut. She did not flinch. She swapped the broken handle to her offhand like a nightstick and tried once more for tendon. When the answer came, it was clean and cruel and professional. High guard beaten down, the edge turning, a short line opened where the pulse keeps count. Flour turned the first spray to paste. It parceled itself in fans across the boards and made little pink islands that thickened at the edges first. A single ribbon-blue thread shook loose from her apron and stuck to a wet print on the floor. It darkened, then brightened again, as if remembering sky. She breathed his name, the grandson's, once like tasting steam to judge a bake, and stayed standing as her knees debated the question without her. She lost without flinching. I painted the blue lump of curing salt in her pocket and the way her shoes leaned inward, tired and ready. A baker's hostel hangs it over the oven, loaves proof a little faster on winter nights. What it caused? On levee days, the hostel knots a ribbon-blue thread to the oven handle and leaves a heel of bread on the sill for boys who do not come back. Apprentices thread ribbon-blue twine through their cuffs before dawn bakes. Some cut a short piece and tuck it into letters home. In 3 wards, the bakeries sweep a pinch of blue salt over the threshold at first light. Flour dust takes on a faint sky tint there, and customers lower their voices without knowing why. A widow keeps his last ribbon in the till. When it brushes a coin, the change comes gentler. Left-hand scribe at dusk wrote his will with the right, fought with the left. He was adequate at both. The alley between the notaries and the dye house held the day's last light like watered wine. Lamp oil breathed from a shutter crack. Ledger leaves skittered along the gutter like pale fish. He sanded his signature, folded it twice, tucked it into his breast, and took the blade in his other hand. First bind. His quill-hardened fingers tried to write a flourish and met steel. The guard bit back and left a crescent bruise like a misplaced seal. Second pass, he overreached, scraping the wall. Brick dust colored the nicked edge and then washed away red. Third, the dusk answered. A line opened at the ribs and his breath made a wet sound, as if a word had been cut in half. He pressed the wound as if to blot it. Blood climbed his palm in lines that looked horribly like good penmanship. The lamp wick coughed smoke at the edge of the frame. I left the blade's final answer outside the picture, which is worse. Bought by a notary's office. Signatures there look braver than they feel. 2 sisters, 1 spear. The elder held the shaft, the younger the steel. They fought like prayer and echo. He divided them with a cut that was also a kindness, fast. I painted their braids crossing in air. The square smelled of onion skins, lamp oil, and wet wool. Frost banded the flagstones. A puddle beside the well held a thin skin that would not choose a season. The sisters lay their palms together once, press, promise, part, and took their grip. The elder set the haft along her forearm, heel braced. The younger choked close to the head where leverage lives. On 3, the elder breathed, counting courage. On 2, said the younger, who had learned what the world does with 3s. They lunged into the same beat and missed the same beat in different places. He read the seam between them like a scribe and slid his shoulder through. The spear bit his sleeve, wrote a bright line, then skated off bone. His blade answered with an oblique that shaved splinters from the shaft and nicked a knuckle. First red, a bead, bright as the cold. The younger recovered fast, scissoring the blade with the spear's steel, and for a heartbeat, the iron sang like a saw. He shortened by a half step, those ugly corrections that make reach tell the truth, and turned the edge across the space where their hands were not. Blood came in 2 voices. The elder's, deep and steady, ran warm along the grain of the haft and fell in thick ropes that slapped the stone and smudged into black with breath. The youngers, higher, startled, freckled the air in fine mist where the artery was near skin. Steam rose in threads from the spray when it met the frost. The spear faltered, the haft slipped. The skin on the puddle learned red and cracked inward like a small map. He caught the length with his forearm, turned, and made the dividing cut, low, clean, and merciful in its speed. So fast the braids finished crossing before their knees knew. After the flagstones held neat ellipses where the pools had learned to settle, a single braid lay across the gap between them like a bridge the day refused to keep. I left the last drip thick on the paint. Hog bristle dragged once so the eye could feel weight, and a crescent of frost hissed pink toward the well. A village council displays it during elections. The speeches shorten. What it caused? The council funded a winter class where girls learn spear in pairs and, more importantly, to argue timing until it becomes one voice. The grave by the east wall grows flowers out of season. No one admits to watering them. Stable boy at noon, sun high, dust bright, a switch for courage tied to his wrist by the ostler. He was all elbow and hope. The stable yard was a low bowl of glare. Ruts flaked into salt plates, thistleheads crisped to gray, puddles skating with rainbow fat from harness grease, manure steamed sweet sour, flies stitched black cursive over the troughs. Beyond the hedges the downs lay bleached and humming, a paper world that crackled when the wind remembered itself. Geese patrolled like magistrates. Crows kept their black bookkeeping on the fence. He lived in the shadow under the loft, straw in the shirt, splinters in the sleep, a rope-burn bracelet on each palm from hauling water. Most days were a list of humiliations. Teamsters flicking reins at his ears to hear him flinch. The farrier calling him soft hands. The ostler's girl counting tips on his back without seeing him. A groom making sport of his borrowed boots stuffed with rag. A cook sending him away from the kitchen door because boys who smell of horse do not deserve pears. Shame sat in his throat like a mouthful of old pennies, heavy and metallic. It kept him quiet until it didn't. Nights he lay awake, measuring rafters with his eyes and rehearsing braver answers he never gave. Mornings he woke with teeth aching from holding words, and the day broke him to chores. Muck, haul, curry, fetch. Each command a notch. Rage he folded small and hid where work lives. He drove nails too hard, punched fence posts until his knuckles sang, ran the ditch line until the lungs burned clean. He wanted the fast lift of fame, the step up from boy to name. A fortune teller at midsummer took his last copper and told him he would win when noon is a coin. He trained for it like a hunger, rose before the roosters, cut nettles in rows, shadow fenced the straw bales, counted steps in primes, tied stones to his wrists to learn weight, ran the lanes till the dawn peeled, starved a little to save for lessons that never came, whispered his victory to the horses so they would recognize him after. He believed the square of light at noon was his sign, a bright floor laid down for him to climb. When the circle chalked, his thoughts were pure arithmetic dressed as bravado. I take the long blade at the offset. I make his reach a mistake. They will cheer my surname. She at the well will notice. The first touch wrote a red comma on his sleeve, and his confidence tried to fold itself back into a smile. The second touch went deeper. The switch on his wrist tapped uselessly against his palm. Disbelief arrived in stages, first at the color, then at the warmth, then at the taste of iron he had only ever read about. He said, wait once, to noon, to the teller, to time. He went to his knees, surprised that the world stayed exactly the same height. The square of noon pooled around him like a dropped coin. His shadow tightened and shivered. Flies stitched frantic black cursive over the trough. The rainbow-slick puddle by the pump quivered without a hoof to blame it. Hay dust hung grain by grain in the hard light. In the loft, the pulley rope gave a slow, fibrous creak, as if the barn itself were swallowing. A gelding blew once and went quiet. The geese, yard magistrates, stood down, their muttering along the hedge, and watched like jurors who already knew the sum. On the fence, a crow, one of the yard's black bookkeepers, hopped down a rung and cocked its head as if totaling him again, then made a single bark that sounded like an entry, closed. Farther off, a teamster stopped mid-flick and let the rain fall against his own boot. The smell went iron under horse. Sweet-sour manure thickened in the heat. Somewhere beyond the kitchen door, pears ripened for other mouths. A thin wind came late and only moved the ribbon-blue twine at his wrist. The fighter stepped close, no triumph, and said very softly, so only the boy and I could hear, "Victory is a debt you pay in the dark. Fame is only the receipt." The boy blinked as if a different day had been named. He tried to nod and could not find the neck for it. I stopped the scene at the first shadow that understood. Not for sale. I wrote his murderer's sentence on the back of the panel in pencil, because paint felt like a lie. When I turn the canvas to the wall, the room keeps a square of noon on the floor. What it caused? Fortune tellers in that ward no longer book readings at noon. They say coins go deaf then. The ostlers cut courage switches loose before the market bell and hang them by the tack room door to dry. Boys untie fewer of them. The farrier keeps a single switch nailed over his stall, blue twine still tied, and does not say whose it was. When a charcoal copy of the panel was shown in the poorhouse, crows filled the fence outside and did their black bookkeeping until the steward shut the shutters. Teamsters in the yard have stopped flicking reins at boys' ears. They slap their own boots instead and look away. Hawkhood lady, a falconer who never missed, and she wore strange armor meant for talons as much as steel. A hooded gorget of boiled leather sewn with tiny jess rings that chimed when she breathed. Laminar plates, shingled in lacquered feathers over thin mail. A left pauldron widened and padded, the perch, while the right lay spare so a cast would clear. Creance hooks stitched along her belt. A beaked bever to turn aside a footing hawk. Greaves scored with pale claw lines. Bells tuned to the Aries wind hidden in the glove's laces. She smelt of lamp wax, raw meat salt, and oiled leather. She did, once. I left her hood on the post, and the glove reaching toward a wrist that would not return. The fight happened on a field scribbled with jesses and tether pins, white mutes chalked in the grass, molted feathers stuck like small flags where the wind had left them. She moved to bind his steel the way she gentled a wild tiercel, glove high, jess rings chiming, beaked bevor angling for a catch, only for him to drop a handspan and write a red signature up under the glove. The cut found the artery clean. It answered in 2 hard beats, bright parabolas that starred the hood's inside and rang off the pinboard, before the pour came heavy, warm, and certain, copper in the throat. The glove ballooned, her fingers slipped in their own heat. Little bells in the laces chattered and then went dull when blood soaked the felt. She tried to cinch a jess around the wrist as a tourniquet. It filled and slid, red as creance through fingers. She countered like a falcon striking blind, short, savage, by feel. The widened perch pauldron took one blow with a wet slap and shed a sheet of red down lacquered feathers. The next cut shaved the shingle and sent plumes pinwheeling scarlet. He came in on ugly half-steps, correcting the blade's reach, shoulder checking her off the tether line. Creance hooks on her belt grabbed his coat. and tore loose with red commas where they kissed skin. The pinboard ticked with drops like rain learning its work. When she turned the glove to trap his edge, the artery coughed again, and the spray wrote stars across her throat guard. Feathers stuck where wet met down. A gust lifted them, set them, lifted again. A slow breathing of red and gray. Underfoot the ground learned weight and the runnels thickened. I dragged the brush on its side to score the downhill veins. Thin at first, then wider where the earth pooled them into a dark lake around the pins. The smell went iron. Flies arrived as if summoned. Far off the hawk stooped at nothing and called, baffled. The airy hall hung it near their molting room. The birds grow new feathers there cleanly. What it caused, apprentices now tie a ribbon blue thread at the wrist before free flights. They say the birds come back sooner. The pinboard under the painting never fully dries. There's always a darker shine there by dawn, a boy with festival ribbon. Too young for war, old enough for a circle. The ribbon on his sleeve was the color the sky forgets last. I painted the ribbon and the sleeve, and left the arm implied. Museums refuse it. Pilgrims do not. They stand, touch nothing, and leave softer. On romanticizing a monster. People ask if I romanticize him. Once I did. I painted him on purpose, not as he was, but as I wanted him to be. Head high, sword catching the sun, all jaw and justice. I built a storm behind him that bowed to his posture, carved the light to make a cathedral of his outline. I knew what I was doing. I made a hero from a shadow, and then I let the world believe it was a portrait. They believed because they wanted to. Later, when they asked, I said I didn't have to romanticize him. He did that himself. He told the world he would live forever, and the world believed him just enough to keep telling the story. That is almost the same thing in some lights. Once late at night, he spoke to me. Not the crowd, not the ghosts he usually played to. Just me, the painter. "Does it look like I'm winning yet?" he asked, voice hushed, unsure if he wanted an answer. "They cheer so loud I can't hear the quiet between. You paint that quiet, don't you? I see it even when no one else does." I didn't answer. He went on. "Tell me the truth. Do I still look like someone worth painting, or just someone who's been painted too many times to be real anymore?" He rubbed his eyes like a boy too tired to lie. "Sometimes I think I keep fighting so you'll have something to remember me by. Isn't that stupid?" A man trying to earn his own afterimage. I told him the truth, but softly. "You already did, long ago." He nodded. "Then I hope I die with a good line. Or at least a good color palette. Make sure it's warm, yeah? Even monsters deserve warmth. Once. Just once." He was quiet a while after that. The lamps made 2 coins of light in the oil on his cheekbones. Wind worried the eaves the way a mother worries a fever. Then he said, still not looking at me, "If I stop fighting, the voices get louder. If I keep fighting, you get louder. I can't tell which is worse. Pick for me." "No," I said. "I only pick colors." He laughed softly. "Colors pick men. You taught me that. You picked me blue the first time. Sea blue, ribbon blue, bruise blue. That was kind and untrue. Do it again when I'm done. Lie for me once more, and I'll tell the truth for both of us the rest of the way." He tapped his chest, as if knocking on a locked room. "They want me to ask you for absolution. I don't know that word. I know primer. I know ground. If I stand still long enough, will you ground me?" "I'll try," I said, "but ground cracks." "So do I," he said, almost pleased. "That's where the light gets its little teeth in." Consequences of the first lie. That purposeful portrait, the one with the storm kneeling to his posture, went out like a saint's relic and returned like a riot. A ribbon blue selvage crept onto the festival copy without any plasterer admitting the dye. Bread sellers tied thin blue threads to their baskets that season and swore customers counted coins, slower under that color. Veterans brought it to taverns to remember courage and left with broken glasses and newly sharpened knives. A priest borrowed it for a sermon on redemption, and 3 boys ran away to find him before the blessing dried. A fencing master nailed a copy in his salle. Injuries fell for a season, and duels doubled anyway. The city plasterers copied the outline onto a festival banner. 2 guilds measured their pride against the canvas and settled the math in blood. A widow kissed the painted jawline and said a name that wasn't his. A magistrate hung it over the bench. Verdicts came quicker, mercy slower. A bookseller used it for a shop sign and sold out of epics, then pamphlets, then lies. In the alley behind, a boy learned to hold a blade too long for him because the picture had promised the world would shorten itself to fit. It did not. When they brought the painting back to me, smoked at the edges from a lantern dropped in a cheer, it smelled of wine, iron, and regret. I cleaned it with spit and patience and left a thumbprint in the varnish on purpose, an oily crescent no one would notice but me. The next morning, a blue thread showed through the storm where no blue lived. The lie had learned a color and was teaching it to the room. The last portrait. This will be my last of him. I have primed it with a ground of burnt umber. I have sketched him walking into a vast place that is not a heaven, because he does not like rules. He is looking back over his shoulder. He is smiling the way stray dogs do when they decide to love you first. His sword hangs from his hand like a rain gutter after a storm. He is listening to someone no one else can hear. I lay in the eyes last, 2 small highlights, beads rather than glints, the exact clear beads that belonged to the boy on the fence rail. They sit there no matter what face I give him, as if the painting remembers what I would rather forget. When I reach for the lower right corner, my hand ticks again, an old metronome of fear, and sometimes the mother's swallowed scream echoes in the room so softly, I think it is a draft. Under the earth colors, a thin vein of ribbon blue keeps trying to surface, a ghost thread in the ground layer. I push it down with umbers and patience. It rises with the simple persistence of water. On nights when the room is almost kind, the blue stays hidden. On others, it climbs into the field like a cornflower that has mistaken battle for summer. He is about to tell a joke that will make you laugh, and then, 5 minutes later, make you cry. That delay is the worst of him and the most human. If he reads this, he will argue with the clouds in it. He will say I made his eyes too kind, or too cruel, or too tired, or too awake. He will make me fix it and then undo the fix with his life. He will be wrong and right. And because paintings collect what we refuse to say out loud, the last wet edge will hold a secret, 2 bright beads that are not his at all, and a ribbon I did not paint. Where the last portrait went, it refuses walls. A lighthouse keeper tried it first, hung on the stair. Each dawn, it had turned to face the stone. A judge kept it in chambers until the bead eyes made his clerks resign, in good order. He logged it as evidence and could not say of what. Now it lives in a crate with its name chalked wrong on purpose. When the crate is opened for inventory, there are always 2 faint water spots on the inner lid, ribbon blue. Ledger, mark. When I sign the corner, the light goes fickle and makes a small miracle. The 2-bead highlights in his eyes catch it, and for a breath, they are the boys again, clear as prayer on glass. On bad evenings, I cannot tell which boy, the steadfast watcher on the fence rail, or the farm child who hiccuped, "Wait," and tried to hand time back its own hour. Sometimes both look out from the same wet shine, as if grief had twins. In the lower right, despite fresh varnish laid careful as a blessing, the old bloom rises. It does not behave like paint. It behaves like a wound that will not agree to be a scar, freckles pushing through, varnish over blood, the cooper's last word refusing the dark. Lately a thinner vein appears beside it, faint as a whisper, a ribbon blue that no brush remembers laying, the color his sister tied on the fork, the color the salt kept when sky forgot. I press my name into the corner and feel it snag. Signing is not absolution. It is an alibi written too late. The chalk from that day is still on the soles of my boots. The mother's swallowed scream is still cupped in my palm. The boy's tears are still the wet that thins my pigments when I reach for light. I tell myself I paint to keep rooms breathing, to teach careful men to be kind, to make brave women cautious. The truth is plainer and heavier. I am an accomplice with good brushwork. So I sign small, not brave, only a ledger mark. The paint will cure. The stain will wait. The ribbon will lift and fall in the mind's weather. The beads will keep their watch. If anyone asks what I have painted, I will point to those two truths sharing a single light and say, this is how he lives, and this is what it costs. If anyone asks why it hurts, I will give the answer the canvas whispers when the lamps are out. Because I did not stop him, and because we did not stop him. Let this be the last beautiful accounting. Let the ribbon remember bread, not blood. Let the beads count mercy, not skill. I sign, and leave the corner of the canvas empty for the name we owe the dead. I set the brush down where even Wednesday cannot reach it. If there is any forever in me, it will be to keep watch, not to look away.